for the chemistry a couple of days ago.
Oh my gosh.
You taking chemistry classes?
No.
Okay.
The stuff in the ion.
So, got my first couple of answers here. We got 10 minutes. Okay, so 10. We got 30 minutes.
It's okay. I'm sitting next to Sarah.
Anybody think they got some other answers?
Go 45.
45? Okay.
5 to 20.
You want to narrow that down to one answer?
If I'm on my A game, I might get 2 pretty good hours in, but I gotta
Okay, 2 hours. Anybody less than 10 minutes? How long?
Maybe 3.
3 minutes. Okay.
5.
Okay, 5. Seems like some good data points. All right, so nothing left in the chat. Okay, so here is the actual answer. They did a study at University of Michigan. This is probably about a decade ago, maybe a little bit longer now. And what they did was it's University of Michigan, so there are thousands of incoming freshmen every single semester. And they asked those freshmen to go home, and this was through all freshman level classes. So there were science classes, there were arts classes, there was everything. They said, go home, and when you're ready to study, open up your books and get your pencils out and whatever it means to you to study, and start a timer. And about the time that you've read something and it doesn't seem to stick and you're like, I know I just read a sentence, but that didn't mean anything, stop the timer and just record the data. And they had lots and lots of students do this. And about the average, once they accumulated all that data and somebody did all of the statistics, was about 25 minutes. 25 minutes. And again, that number is for incoming college freshmen. And that seems to be probably even lessening in this next decade with the onset of like TikTok, which is a 30-second piece of information that is blasting you in your retinas and causing your brain to go from like the happiest you've ever been to the saddest you've ever been. And we're seeing that attention spans are going even further down. So basically what you were seeing is something like this. You start, let's say this is just on this axis, which is the y-axis. It's not a math class, but apparently it is. If you go up on the y-axis, you're talking about comprehension, right? Which means understanding and it's useful studying, let's just say that. And you start out and you're really good. And in about 25 minutes, you start to crash. Now, does anybody ever study for 25 minutes or 3 minutes or 5 or 10 or 30 or 45 and just like, that's it, you're just done for the night? Sometimes, but most of the time, let's say you got an exam coming up, it's a Saturday, or you got one on Monday and it's a Sunday. Do you just study for like 20? No, probably a lot of us, what we do is we sit there for 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, God forbid 6, 7, 8, and you are doing what? Nothing. After that 25 minutes, it's just basically sitting there and you're kind of wasting time. So what is the takeaway from that data? The takeaway from that data says that instead of doing that and sitting there for 4 hours studying that evening, where you essentially got 25 minutes worth of useful studying, is about 25 minutes in, take a break. And that break should last you about 5 minutes. You take a break for 5 minutes and you do something that is rewarding to your brain. And whatever that just meant to you, that could mean you go and pet your dog, you go and play with your kid, you go have a cookie, you watch TikTok for 5 minutes, you play some music, and whatever it is, you take a break for 5 minutes. And then at 5 minutes, you study for another 25 minutes. And in another 25 minutes, you're gonna take a break for 5 minutes. And you do this, and in the 4 hours or so that you're studying, your comprehension level remains a lot higher than it would have been had you never gotten up and taken a break. What does this do? It tricks your brain into saying, okay, well, 25 minutes and then I know that I can do something that's fun. and then I'll come back to it. And that's, your brain is very old in terms of it evolved 300,000+ years ago, and it hasn't really changed all that much since. And we know that the reward centers in our brain are very, very useful in motivation, right? If you know that you're going to get rewarded with something, you're willing to do whatever task it may be, like go to work, right? You're getting rewarded with money, probably not enough money, but money, right? So if you were told to go to work and you're not getting paid, probably not going to be very motivated, right? So it works the same way with studying, is to do the work that you have to do, but take those breaks, and not only take the break, reward yourself, and you're going to maintain your level of comprehension much longer. And the other thing that's going to do is eventually, once you start getting into the mode of studying, you might hit 25 minutes and go, oh, I think I'd probably go longer. I could probably go for 30 minutes and then take a break. And then about a week, you could probably go for about 40 minutes. And then about a couple months later, you might be able to study for a whole hour, and your level of comprehension hasn't fallen off as far as it used to. And you might be able to maintain much higher levels of comprehension throughout your entire evening of studying. So that's the first thing. A rewarding 5-minute break in between your study intervals is going to help you, first of all, want to study because you know that you're going to be rewarding yourself. And second of all, it's going to reinforce the learning that you've taken, because when you walk away and you do something else, it allows the certain neurons in your brain that are going to retain information to start putting that into your brain more than just kind of short-term memory. That'll help you start to extend your study sessions into 1 hour, 2 hour per night, and avoid cramming. So that's the second thing that I like to talk about. I know, as a student that was in college for lots and lots of years to get all of my degrees, the Pavlovian way in which I basically taught myself how to study originally was just, well, on the weekend before I have a test coming up, I'll study on a Sunday. That's not good enough, especially when the courses get more difficult. They're not super interesting to you. Like, not every class you take is going to be in your immediate zone of interest. And the harder those classes get, the less effective cramming for a few hours on a single night before is going to be. So what are we talking about when we're talking about not cramming? We're talking about reinforcing your studying. So the best way that the data shows that people learn is by not studying multiple hours an evening before a test, but to do something called reinforcement of the information. And the way that that works is you do something like this. You go to class, and then here's the key thing that unfortunately not everyone just thinks to do right away. What do you do when you go to class?
Take notes.
Yeah, take notes. Take notes. Even if that instructor gives you the slides, you should still be taking notes. Taking notes does not mean copy everything down that's on the slides, particularly if you're given the slides. Most instructors will be happy to provide you the slides. If they're not, sneak a picture with your phone of the slides, but most instructors will give you the slides. So it doesn't really do any good to write everything down on the slides. But if your professor is anything like me, he's going to be up on the board. He or she's going to be up on the board, writing things, drawing figures, saying extra anecdotes that might help you remember certain things that are on the slides. Those are the kinds of notes you should be taking. If an instructor is taking the time to write something on the board or draw something on the board, it's probably not just for fun, right? It's probably pretty important. And particularly if that's not provided to you anywhere else, that's where you're going to take your notes. So lectures can be anywhere from 50 minutes to 2 hours, depending on if you're in a 8-week class. But you go to class, and I guess that's another thing, is go to class. Right? You can't just skip the class and look at the notes, because you're missing out on a lot of excess information. You're missing out on the opportunity to ask questions. You're missing out on the opportunity to hear other people ask questions, because even if you are a little bit shy and you don't want to ask questions, which will be something that you probably want to work on as well, somebody else might ask a question that might tip you off onto, oh, I didn't even think of it like that, or that's exactly the kind of question I had, and you'll hear from the instructor right away. So first of all, going to class and taking notes. Now, once class is over, the next time, the immediate next time that you have about an hour, maybe even less, depending on how much you can give up, you want to go ahead and rewrite your notes. Now, what does that mean? To me, what I would do is I would go to class and I would first take handwritten notes. I would not bring my laptop or my tablet or whatever. I would take my handwritten notes. There is a lot of science out there that says the best possible way to take notes is by actually manually writing it down, because it activates lots of neuronal pathways that actually the mechanics of writing it out help you retain information better than typing or just recording it. Now, I think you should record lectures as well, as long as it's okay with the professor. That's a great way to go back, just in case the professor, like me, talks pretty fast. There's a lot of information to cover. If you feel like you missed something, you realize in your head, that's okay, I got it recorded right here. I can go back. So the next time that you've got a couple of minutes where you can sit down, you want to take those notes that you just hand wrote and you want to flesh them out. Flesh out your notes. What does that mean? That means add additional details. If you're taking those notes in like short form handwriting, you can fully write out the words. And usually what I would do is I would type them at this point. So I would open up my notebook from the time that I was going to class, and then I would take my computer and I would just go to Word, or I would go to Google Documents. It's the free version of Word, essentially. Just need a Gmail account, and you can start typing them. That would allow me to make it all fancy. I could put bullet points, I could bold things, I could drag images in, and it would help me to find out where, when I was taking my handwritten notes, did my brain go, uh-oh, and I was thinking about, going to my favorite bar on the weekend, or I was thinking about like I've got to pay rent, or oh my gosh, like what did that last text message I got mean, right? Your brains are certainly going to wander at some point. There's nobody that I've ever met that just can lock in for a full 50-minute lecture. Maybe someone next to you coughs and you didn't hear something, there's some of the lights flicker and you're kind of looking. Your brains are probably not locked in for the full lecture, but it's okay, because you're going to go back as soon as possible, look at those notes, and if there are parts of the notes where you're like, I don't even know what I was writing at this point, or I think that clearly I've missed something, you can do two things. One, you can ask the professor, right? Send them an email, and you could say, hey, when you were talking about, let's just pick something. When you were talking about alleles, I wrote down alleles, but it's just a word. I don't even know what it means, right? Professors, they love that, because that's what they got into this for. Believe it or not, it's probably not the paycheck. They got into it because they like to give the information. They like to feel special. They like to feel important. So when you send them an email and you're not rude in the email, they'll be happy to respond to it, right? The second thing is you can ask another student. And this will come back when we talk about other ways to study, but maybe you get somebody's phone number or your social media, or you make a WhatsApp or whatever people do nowadays, and you simply say, hey, what do you think the professor meant by alleles? I totally just did not get that down in my notes, and they get to explain it to you. So that gives you a really good set of notes for that particular lecture. Now, the key here is you cannot wait very long to do step 2. You can't wait very long because, well, if you're taking a lecture, the lecture begins on a Monday and it picks up where you left off on Wednesday, and you keep going. So if you haven't done this, then you've got 2 days to go through. And if you wait again, you've got multiple weeks to go through. And so these first few steps cannot wait very long. Okay, the third thing you're going to do is about a week before 1 week prior to the exam, you're going to take your rewritten notes or your typed notes. You're going to rewrite all of the notes. Rewrite all of the notes. Now, I would go back to handwriting them at this point. So first in class, we hand wrote the notes. Then we went home each day or each evening or the next day at the absolute latest, and we typed them up. So at the end of the entire unit, we've got a nice typed out document with images added, and it's bolded and there's bullet points and it looks so great. And you've asked all the questions of your professor to fill in those spaces where you might have had a brain fart. And now you're gonna go ahead and rewrite all of the notes by hand. While you're doing that, you're gonna do the fourth thing. And this is where we're gonna talk about picking a place to study, because probably not going to want to do this in the middle of a library unless you're doing it quietly, but you're going to say what you're writing out loud. So say the notes out loud. Literally, not in your head, out loud. So as you're writing it, you're going to write alleles are forms of a gene in a population. That brings you to multiple modality learning. The first one was handwriting, that's one modality. The second one was typing it electronically. The third one is you're now saying it out loud while also copying it down, handwriting a fourth time. That is just what we call recitation. Now, recitation does not work for everyone, but it works for a good majority of students, and it's not going to feel like studying. Studying generally feels like, oh man, I gotta sit here and try and learn this stuff. You're not really even thinking that. You're just thinking, I have to get this done. It's a manual labor thing that I've got to sit there and do. And when you do this, your brain is going to start to remember it. I mean, if you've ever taken a foreign language class, there are only so many times you could write, me llamo Travis, and start to remember that that means my name is Travis, right? It's the same idea. It's recitation. When I first went to college, I was not a good student. I was a good GPA. That's all I was. I got into college on playing sports, and I had a good GPA, but during high school, I could take AP classes and I didn't have to really study. I mean, it was just, that's how it was. I came from a background where my dad was in higher education, and I knew I would have to do good. And so I just had the brain that could do it. And then I went to college and I thought I could do the same thing. In my very first biology exam, I got a 64, which not terrible by any means, but not a C, to pass. And it probably wouldn't have been nearly as bad if the professor of that intro biology course wasn't named Dr. Matthew Drought, my dad. So, some people always come to me like, oh man, I just feel like I disappointed you because I got a C on the test. First of all, no, that's passing. And second of all, okay, well, imagine if you did disappoint me. Well, when you go home, you don't have to see me, right? When I went home, I had to look him in the eyes and go, I don't know what happened. So I knew right away that I had to rethink how I was studying. And so I looked into the data, and this is what I did, and I've never changed since. And I got through graduate school doing this, and I know it'll work for you as well. Okay, so those are the first, how do I study? This is what I suggest. Now, there are other ways to study, and there are different videos on YouTube that you can go look at. But for me, this worked because it never felt like I was studying. It just felt like something I had to get done. So that's studying the how. Let's talk about studying where. Okay, need some input here. Where do you study? Physically, where?
Either at school or in my room.
Okay, so let's talk about my room.
The library.
Okay, to the library / school. Okay, anywhere else? Kitchen table? right? A lot of people do it in the kitchen. My couch. The car.
Oh, my
Where else? Work.
Yep.
Anywhere else?
Coffee shop or cafe.
On a date?
Oh, my bed.
The
Oh,
coffee shop.
okay, in your room?
Yeah.
Yeah, on a
The
date,
coffee
yeah.
shop.
Coffee shop, okay. So like a cafe, what you're saying? Anywhere else? Okay. Let's throw out library and school for just a second. And let's talk about something called state-dependent learning, okay? State-dependent learning essentially means that whatever situation your body is in, that's what your brain expects you to do. Okay, what things should you do in your room? Sleep? Yep. What else?
Watch TV.
TV, sure. How about this one? Let's be a little more scientific. Intercourse, right? That happens in a room. Does any of that happen in a school during the test?
No.
No, okay. So that's probably not a good idea. What about kitchen? What do you do in the kitchen?
Cook.
Okay, cook, and what else?
Eat.
You eat. Yeah, and you clean it, sure. Does any of that studying, does that happen during the exam? No, okay, good. What about my couch?
Watch TV.
TV,
Eating.
just veg out, right? Eat, whatever. Is any of that studying? No. What about the car? Hopefully you're supposed to be driving and paying attention. Yeah, so probably not the best place to study. What about at work? Oh, at work you work. Okay, so my work, yeah, I'm kind of studying at work because I got to maintain the information. But I don't think any of you else work in higher education. So probably not. And if you are in higher education, you're probably not teaching the class that you're taking. Right? Probably doesn't work that way. So work, you're working, and at a cafe, you're doing all those same things: eating, and drinking, and socializing on your date. Right? So none of that is studying. Basically, what I'm saying is all of those things are distractions. And it's going to be very hard for you to sit down for the 25 minutes and actually be studying, because what happens is your phone goes off, somebody's texting you, they're sending you a video, then you get on TikTok and you're watching the video, and then you get on YouTube, and then you're talking to your friends, and then someone calls you, and then you take a picture on, that's not studying, that's just getting distracted for a long time with your books open. So you do need to go somewhere that is particularly about studying. Now, that doesn't mean that it can't be your room, but you would be surprised about the amount of excess information that your eyes take in that trick your brain. Just seeing a bed can make you sleepy. Just seeing your refrigerator can make you hungry. Just seeing the TV make you want to turn on the TV. So you have to understand that there's been a lot of data that shows that where you are studying is almost as important in how you're studying. I see a lot of people trying to do it at home. What's at home? Your kids, your family, your mom, your dad, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, whatever. That's not going to help you study. And what are they doing? They're causing all kinds of ruckus, right? They're being loud, or mom, can I have this? Dad, can I have this? Right? That's good. I don't care how many times, I mean, if you're a mom, like you can't even go to the bathroom without your kids busting in there and asking you a question. So where did this come from? Well, there was a study done at the University of Hawaii. And they, again, asked their incoming freshmen to think about where they were studying. And the way in which their dorm rooms were set up were essentially like this common area room where you've got like a bed. Right, here's a bed with a pillow, and then here's another bed. And then each person had like a table, right? And then there was like this wall here, and then there was a door. Studying in the bed was not a good option. The desk was for studying, right? But then all of this data suggests you have your eyes seeing a bed, and that's not going to help you out. And what happens is, well, one person might be studying for a test, the other person's got friends coming over, right? Or the door's open and, hey, Travis, what's up, man? You going to the bar this weekend? Yeah. And I'm studying and I was like, oh yeah. And then we start talking for 3 hours, right? I needed to put a sign on my back that said, do not talk to me because I have no self-control and I will just talk to you for 3 hours and not study. So here's what they came up with. They said, okay, well, if you absolutely have to study in your dorm and you can't go to like a study area at school or whatever, here's what you do. You, first of all, try to block your view from your bed if you can. Turn the desk away from the bed so you're just looking at a wall. And the second thing they had them do was to have a little desk lamp on their desk, and it was only ever to be turned on when it was studying time. You cannot turn that on if you are not studying. And they did this and found that just the psychological trick of that light being on, and of course everyone else buying in, like, oh, the person's lamp is on, I'm not supposed to mess with them, increased test scores by a full grade. So going and actually putting your mind in the right mindset of studying will help your studying, will help your retention. Avoid any cues that are going to cause you to become distracted, want to socialize, want to eat, want to talk to somebody, want to turn on a TV, etc. The last thing that we'll talk about in this instance is how many people put on like music while they're studying. Okay, lots of people talk about music. What kind of music? Just whatever you like, right? Music you like. Okay, if that music has words in it, it doesn't matter how quiet it is, your brain is, even in the background, picking up those words, trying to decipher it. And that's too much information coming in. You can put music on, but the best kind of music to study to is generally classical music that doesn't have a ton of beats and like drums and bass, and certainly doesn't have lots of lyrics.
Traditional movie soundtracks could be helpful.
Movie soundtracks, exactly. It's like instrumentals particularly. And stuff that doesn't get you thinking about, like if the Indiana Jones theme comes on, I'm gonna start thinking about Indiana Jones. If the Star Wars theme comes on, right, I'm gonna think about that. Just something that is more background than something that's gonna distract you, even in the background of your mind. Okay, so that's the second thing. The first thing was how do we study? The second thing is where do we study? All of these things matter. Distractions will do just that. They will distract you. Okay, the third thing is another way to talk about how to study, but it's talking about ways that are very popular to study and are consistently shown in the research to be not very effective at retention of information. Okay, how many of you make these wonderful things? Flashcards. Okay, flashcards. Lots of people make flashcards. All right, how many of you do this? Highlight. Highlighters, right? How many of you do that? How many of you simply reread? Reread. Going on Quizlet, that's basically like flashcards, right? Essentially, right? Those are tools that can be used in specific situations, but more often than not, they're used incorrectly. Okay, the first thing, flashcards. Flashcards are not good for concepts.
They're good for terms.
Yes, they're not good for understanding concepts. They're good for definitions. They're good for short one-word answers. They're good for memorization of like words. They're good for very basic factual information, right? If I put a picture of a humorous and then the word humorous, that works. If I put 5 times 5 and then 25 on the back, that works. If I put, what is Mendelian genetics and how does a population change its alleles and what is that? That's too much. You see people all the time with literally an entire soliloquy written on one side of the card, and that's just, it doesn't work. Like maybe it does, like any of these things, if they're working for you, then good. Generally though, if you attend this, probably looking for things to change the way you're studying because it's not working as well as it might. So I always say, unless you are taking an exam that is asking you to memorize facts, like you're taking a lab where you're going to have to identify a bone just by the name, or identify a muscle just by the name, or you're taking a math test with multiplication or basic definitional facts. If you're not doing that, which is most lecture exams are not basic general facts, then you're going to not want to do flashcards. Save the flashcards for when those are useful, okay? The second thing, highlighting. Generally, what people do is do this too much. You ever start highlighting and then you just get carried away and at the end of it, you look down and like 95% of the paragraph is highlighted? All you did was color it. It was like a coloring book. 95% of the information in a passage of a textbook is probably not all that important. Generally, the stuff that's important is already bolded, right? There's like a bold term and then a definition after. That's probably pretty important. If it's not, then you might want to highlight it 1 to 2 lines. People start highlighting, they're like, okay, well, I'll highlight this. And then, oh, but that's important, oh, but this is important. And then you look and like the only word that's not is the and. That doesn't work, okay? Because all you've done essentially is just read it and color it. The next thing, rereading. Rereading the slides, even rereading your notes, rereading the textbook. All of this just leads to something called recognition. You recognize the words. Recognition. Recognition is not understanding. Recognition does not equal understanding. Understanding means that, here's the, me, if I was in an English class, I would get in trouble. Recognition is you recognize it. You say, oh yeah, I've seen that before. Or I'm not supposed to use the definition of the word in the definition, but we all know what that means. You recognize, oh yeah, I know, I've seen that word allele before. I've seen the word, think of a word, I don't know. I've seen the word ribosome before. I've seen the word mitosis before. Okay, I know, yeah, okay. And you think, your brain can even go, oh yeah, okay, I know it. What you're basically doing is going, oh, I've seen this slide before or this picture before, and I think the next one, oh yeah, the next one talks about this. I've seen that picture before, I've seen that slide before. And your brain might even be able to be like, oh yeah, okay, I know it. But if I told you to close your notes, close the slides, put your textbook away, and I said, okay, tell me, what's a ribosome do? And if you go, yeah, I've seen ribosome, you don't know it. Okay, that's what understanding is. When you don't have access to the notes in front of you, you could still tell somebody else what it means. That's what understanding is. And this recognition, this is what leads to the common phrase that I hear from 30% of the students every semester after an exam. Here it is. When I was studying, I knew it, and then I walked in to take the test, and it was like it just. You're like, yeah, that's not how it works, right? Did you walk into your house and forget where you put like your refrigerator? No, because you know where your refrigerator is, right? Like you know who your dad is. You know what your dog's name is because you have learned it, right? You don't just walk into a different room and suddenly you're like, what is this? This is my bedroom? That's my bed. No, because you know it, you understand it. Right. And if I told you, like, could you just walk through your house with me right now? You could, right? You'd be like, okay, first you walk in and then my TV's right there and I usually put my keys right. You know it, right? So how do I check if I've got what we want, which is understanding? We do something called the Socratic method. Anybody know what that is? Anyone know who Socrates is?
Yes.
Socrates was a who?
Philosopher.
Yes, a philosopher, one of like the early philosophers and scientists, essentially. So the Socratic method is basically lecturing. This is the Socratic method, what I'm doing.
Oh, if you can teach it, you can know it.
Exactly. And it leads us into this idea that if you can teach it to somebody else, then you know it. If I got up here and I started talking about Mendelian genetics and I was like, and then I was like, okay, wait, and I had to look at the slides and oh yeah, okay, so you wouldn't be very confident that I knew what the hell I was talking about, right? So hopefully none of your professors have to like read off the slide, and we've all had professors that do that, but that comes from a place of me actually knowing it, right? So how can you test this? Okay, you have to have at some level from each professor a list of objectives that you're supposed to learn. They're called learning objectives. Say in this unit, generally it's like at the end of this section or at the end of this unit, you should know, boom, and it gives you a list of them. Go to your dad, your mom, your husband, your wife, your brother, your sister, your dog, your cat, or a chair. And you go ahead and if it's a chair, pick one yourself, but have them pick one of the learning objectives. And if you cannot put your notes away and tell them, at least at a decent level of understanding, tell them what that's all about, teach it to them, then you do not know it and you're not ready to go in and take an exam on it. If you go, okay, and they go, okay, well, this one says, can you define what the simplest living things are? And if you can't go, okay, so cells are the simplest living organisms, and some organisms are made up of many cells, and some organisms are a single cell, and cells have all kinds of different organelles, and here are some more. If you can't do that without having to refer back to your notes and read off the slides, you don't know it. You may recognize it. There's, well, this one says like ribosome. You're like, yeah, ribosome, that's an organelle. But if you can't say ribosome is the protein assembling factory in the cell, then you don't know what a ribosome is, okay? And that doesn't have to be for a science class, it's for any type of class. That is how you check to see if you actually know something and you understand it and you're ready to take an exam. If you can do that, then you wouldn't be telling me you come into a test and it just out of my head. Because it goes out of your head if you're not looking at it because you only recognize it and you don't understand it, okay? So all of those other things, useful in some situations, but for actually learning it, no. Go back to the thing that I told you, which was take good notes, revise your notes, type them up, rewrite them, say them out loud, and then you'll start to actually retain that information and you'll start to understand it. Second thing is you gotta ask questions. Every professor goes, okay, any questions? And a lot of times as a professor, you see this, or you just see like blank stares, nobody says anything. That's fine. If you don't want to say it in class, email the instructor as soon as possible. Use other resources, YouTube videos, there's plenty of great ones. Go on and look in your textbook. Plenty of great things in textbooks. I don't think you should be reading a textbook like a regular book. If anyone ever has not told you how to read a textbook, first thing you should do, open the textbook to the chapter that you're covering and just give it a cursory glance. Start looking at things, start trying to recognize words you've heard in lecture. Or ideally, read that, not read it, but look at it before you go to the lecture. Say, oh, I think today we're starting chapter 6. So let me just go look and you start, okay. So it looks like he's gonna talk about alleles today, okay. So then when I say alleles or your professor says something, you're like, oh yeah, I know where that is in the textbook, okay. And then once you've got all that information, you've started to revise your notes and it's time to add to them or to go back and say, this is kind of confusing. Then you go, I know exactly where that is in the textbook and you can read that particular section, okay? So that's what I suggest in determining how do I know if I know it? How do I know if I'm ready to take a test? If you can turn your notes off and you can tell people about it. Okay, the next thing is study groups. Now, not everybody wants to do this. This is just another option. Study groups can either be the best thing or the absolute worst thing for you. And it doesn't even matter if you don't like talking to people. It could still be the best thing. And it doesn't even matter if you love talking to people, it can be the worst thing. Here's what I suggest for study groups. Study groups should be no more than 4 people. So 4 people max. And generally, I think 2 is the best. 2 might be the best. Have 1 other person. And what you should do is when it is time to review your notes at the end, about a week before the exam, like I said, you should have already done that by yourself and then come to the study group during the study session and say, oh, we're going to meet here on a Friday at 1 o'clock, okay? And you're going to make sure that that time is spent actually studying. It's not spent talking about, oh my God, this girl did this and it was the, and did you catch the Bachelor last night? Because that's what study groups break down into, and all that is wasted time. It's great, fun to make friends, but that's not studying, right? So maybe you do exactly what we learned today, which is set a timer and say, okay, for the next 25 minutes, we're going to study. And what you guys should do is look through your notes and say, okay, you explain to me this learning objective or this part of the notes, and then I'll explain to you this part of the notes, and then see if we're going to check each other. Because then you might come to a part like, oh man, I am just really, really stuck on what it means. What is natural selection and how is that different from evolution or something like that. And your study group members might be like, oh, the way that I remember that is this. And they'll tell it to you in a slightly different way than your professor did or any of the YouTube videos did. And that's going to help you to understand it from just a slightly different perspective. Okay. The last thing that I need to tell you about is, and this will actually be more in depth in a future seminar. We have them on the first Tuesday of every month at this time and on Zoom. But this one I just want to touch on briefly, and it is for understanding and for retention, you must do the following things: sleep, eat, and bathe. Let's just say that. Take care of yourself. Sleep, eat, and take care of yourself. There are often way too many examples of people who say, oh, I pulled an all-nighter last night. That's not going to work. All that is going to do is make you show up extremely tired. Your brain is not going to work at the full function that it could, and you're going to not do well in the exam. There have been very, 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 very few cases in which I've ever crammed for an entire night, slept for like 30 minutes, and then got up and went to the test and did well. I may have passed fairly, but not done well to a standard that I would want. That is not going to work. Why? Because in sleep, there is a particular type of sleep called REM, which is rapid eye movement. And during REM sleep, you actually start to consolidate information into memory. Without REM sleep, you cannot solidify, you cannot retain memory. And the example that I give and that the data shows is that people who have sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is when you have trouble breathing during your sleeping and you wake up constantly throughout the night. Those people could say, I went to bed at 8 o'clock and I got up at 8 o'clock. It was 12 hours of sleeping and I feel exhausted and my memory is going. And that is because they've never entered REM sleep and they've never consolidated any of that information. The second thing is eating. You have to get in an appropriate amount of calories for the day. And generally that should be protein and not just carbohydrates and sugar and refined simple sugars. You can't just eat ice cream. I mean, you can, but it's not going to be very healthy. And you need those proteins, you need those calories in order to, and you need fats and all the other ones you learned about nutrition. You need them in order to make energy, which is ATP. And basically all I'm trying to tell you is that when you're trying to recall that information, that's a lot of neurons trying to fire, and that requires a whole bunch of energy. If you do not have the energy to fire those neurons, your brain's not going to work very well. You're going to have trouble recalling that information. So you got to eat, amongst other things, to do well in an exam. And then the last thing is to take care of yourself. Because if you don't take care of yourself, you start to lose the will, the drive to even care about yourself in non-physical ways. You have to make sure that you're eating, that takes care of yourself. You have to make sure you're sleeping. You have to make sure that you're keeping up on hygiene. Why? Because this will cause you to get ill and you'll get sick. And when you're sick, you're not going to do well in an exam. Okay? All right, I think I've got most of what I wanted to cover today. The last thing I want to do for this seminar is to take some questions. So if you're on Zoom, you can type your questions. I see we have a couple in the chat right now. And if you're here, I'll take some questions as well. Let's see what we got in the chat here. Okay, so first, someone says, if I'm stressed, I'm not going to remember anything anyway. Absolutely. Try stress relief in various ways. That is going to be from taking care of yourself, making sure you're eating, and certainly making sure you're sleeping. And then there are things that you can do to combat test anxiety. That is certainly a real thing, test anxiety, but test anxiety is not going to lead you to forget everything. People, again, try to say, oh, I just have test anxiety. I'm not a good test taker, and therefore I knew it, but then I came to the test. That's not going to be the case. That means that you recognize the information and then you thought you got anxious because you saw the first question, you didn't actually understand it, and then your anxiety gets amplified. So we'll talk about test taking strategies later on in the seminar series. But if you actually understand these questions and you understand the topics, it will reduce your test anxiety during the exam because you'll start answering questions. Oh yeah, I know that one. I know that one. And you'll start to come down off of the immediate stress and you can start to actually feel better because you're like, oh yeah, I actually do know these and that's obviously the answer. So we'll talk about test taking strategies and how you can combat test anxiety in a future one. So that's the first one. What question from the crowd here? Yeah.
When it comes to questions about like lecture hall and notes you're taking, how can you formulate questions? Because sometimes what I struggle with is I'll have the concept in front of me. I know I'm struggling with it, but I don't know how to phrase it in like a question form.
That's a good one. So if you are in the lecture and the professor's talking and you're like, oh, man, I'm not really quite there with it, but he's moving on, she's moving on, and I don't know. Well, they'd be happy to go back, right? If you're like, I just was thinking about something you said a couple slides ago, and I just thought of the question. No professor should be like, well, I don't care, I've moved on, right? That's fine. So take some time and try to write out your question. If you don't want to do it in class, send an email, right? Take the time to formulate the question. The better the question is, the better your answer will be. So yeah, you don't have to immediately ask the question. It's just important that before generally you come to the next lecture that you ask the question, or some professors will go, okay, we're going to start, but before we start, anything from last time you want me to, cover? Or even if your professor doesn't ask that, say, hey, I was kind of looking over my notes and I wanted to ask this, but I didn't get a chance. And so could you answer this question? Usually everyone should be happy to do that. Go to office hours, schedule a Zoom call, go see the professor. The best thing you can do, the best thing, and even at OCCC, where we generally have very small class sizes, is to make your professor know your face, right? I admit that even students who, who, for me, I love talking to students, but if I get an email from them at the end of the semester going, oh man, I just don't know, is there any way I can pass your class? And I don't even know who that person is. I'm a little bit less likely to be like, well, yeah, come on in. But if you've been trying the whole semester and I know you and we've talked a bunch of times, I'm way more willing to be like, yeah, come on and let's talk about how we can improve or some strategies. It's just, it works in your favor for you to be a presence, right? Your professors have 200 plus students every semester, new faces. And so getting your face and a name put together is very useful. So that's a good question. How do I know how to ask the question? Well, even if you don't know right in the moment, write it down and ask it at a later time. Someone in the chat says, the way that my professor works is that she'll use the lecture slides and the textbook, and I'll read the textbook, but I find it hard to know what to write down from the book. I can look at the lecture slides and rewrite them all day, but when it comes to the textbook, I'm lost and I'm confused. And then the exam comes and I feel like I'm ready and I get almost all the lecture slide questions right, but I get confused because There's answers on the test that I've never seen or reviewed, and I think maybe it's from the book. But I'm like, how do I know what to write when it's 2 chapters and there are 40 pages long? Okay.
That's so good.
That's valid. That's so
okay.
valid.
Okay, great. So, first of all, if you feel like that you're totally like just not getting what is supposed to come from the textbook, you gotta tell your professor. You can't just guess. You have to talk to them, right? And if they're not responding to you in an adequate amount of time, which it says in the syllabus, a specific time in which they're as an institution, they are required. If they're not doing that, then you have to go above them and say, hey, I'm trying to get in contact with my professor and they're not helping me out. So that's the first thing, would be to go to the professor and say exactly what the comment was like, I feel like I'm getting it from your lectures, but in the textbook chapters you're telling me to read, I don't know what information I'm supposed to retain from them. So they should be able to answer that question. And if they're not, then obviously that's a problem that you need to address with the department head probably. The second thing is there has to be a set of learning objectives. There absolutely must be. That's another requirement for the syllabus to list learning objectives, what you need to retain from that chapter. And so if you look at the learning objectives and you look at the lecture slides and it seems like, well, this learning objective doesn't seem to be covered in the lecture slides, that's probably in the textbook. And so then that would be probably the information you're supposed to retain from the textbook chapters. So without knowing, the specific example that's going on or what book you're using, that would be my suggestion is to, you have to address it with the professor. That's the first thing. They will answer it. They'll be happy to answer it. I know very, 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 very few professors who are ever just like, well, I hate to answer questions about my class. I mean, students say this all the time, oh, that guy just wants to fail students. I even the most crass of people that I've ever worked with do not want to fail students. They may hold students to a much higher standard than other professors in terms of like what they'll do to help students, but they will never just be like, well, I'm not telling you, you have to figure it out. And certainly if that was the case, then you need to talk to the department head or the dean. Okay, so that's a good question. I don't know if that really answers your question. Kind of a hard one. Another one from online. How would you use these practices for online class? I don't think that anything that I discussed today can't be adopted for online classes. Generally in an online class, you still have lectures. And if you don't have lectures that are synchronous, there's asynchronous videos, meaning like you could watch them whenever you want. But there is something about lecture. Maybe they just post the slides. That's a little bit more unfortunate, but you do run into where it's just the slides and you have to read them. So you should still take notes. After you take the notes, the next time you get a chance, you should revise the notes. And they should rewrite them while saying them out loud. I think all that still works in an online class as well. And then, of course, your online professor is still supposed to have a presence. They should have office hours that you can attend on Zoom and you can still talk to them and ask questions. A lot of times students don't want to ask the professors questions. I get it, like you don't want to come off like you seem like you don't know things and it's kind of embarrassing and it's kind of like intimidating to talk to a professor, but that's really what we're here for, right? That's what we're here for. So yeah, any other questions?
So it's like, I'm probably not the only one that feels this way, but I don't know. But it's like you have 3 to 5 classes, and so it's like, how do you time manage like all of these steps for every single class?
Yeah, so that's a great one, and I think our next seminar is actually gonna be on time management, so I'll have more to say about that time. But just a real quick one, let's say you are taking multiple classes. Okay, generally, you take 3 to 5 classes. Let's say we're taking biology, and we're taking physics, whatever, and I'm taking an English, and I'm taking a math. So first thing that I would do is, first of all, evaluate my life of, okay, how many hours am I working, right? If I've got a full-time job, how many hours are you working? 40 hours, right? So then how many hours am I going to school? Well, you can just take the word credits and switch in hours. And so let's say these are all like 4 credit classes. That's 4, 8, 12, 16 hours of school, right? Could be more because Maybe your biology and physics have a lab and then it's an extra credit or 2. So whatever. And generally the rule is that for every hour you're in class, you do 2 hours of studying. That's like the rule. So then you got 32 hours of studying that you need to do. And you're doing a full-time job, and you have kids, and suddenly your hours in the week are plummeting to almost 0 to do anything else but work, study, and maybe sleep and eat. Nobody lives like that, right? I mean, even unless you're just like in med school or grad school, and that's basically what you have to do to get through, right? But as a freshman or an undergraduate, it's people try to do it. It's very, very hard to get that done. So here's the thing. There's 2 kind of hard, like almost impossible Sophie's choices to make. One, you either have to cut down the work hours. Not everybody can do that because you've got to make money. Or maybe cut down your class time hours. Now, can you do cutting that down? Well, some people can, some people can't because it's tied to their money from the government to pay. And so that's tough. But those are the suggestions first. Now, the second suggestion is rank them in terms of how difficult are they for me. So if that was mine, I would go, okay, well, physics is going to be the hardest for me because I just wasn't very good at physics and calculus. I got through. I was lucky if I got a C. And I did, and it was wonderful. And then probably math, right? If I was taking a calculus class, math would be second. But the professor that I took for Calc 1 and Calc 2 was a really good teacher, and it was like the only time that calculus ever made sense to me, and he was nice, and he gave us like this little cheat sheet on the exams, and I got through with a B, and it was great. But that'll, your mileage may vary. And then probably English would be next, because, I'm not the best writer, but I'm okay with the language, and okay, and then the last one will be biology. Why? It's not that the biology class was not hard, but it was also something that I'm really interested in and knew that I wanted to do. And so I knew that probably at least that would be the one that I probably needed to spend the least amount of time on. And then you split up whatever hours of studying you have from most to least. And then the other thing, which we'll talk about in our seminar on time management, is look at how those classes are going to shake out during the semester. Generally, semesters are 16-week long. If you're taking 8-week courses, you should probably be taking one 8-week course. If you're taking multiple 8-week courses, I don't even know who can do that, and we have lots of fights about that, about why are they advising people to take multiple 8-week courses and also work overtime at their job and whatever. But you should then decide, okay, well, my physics, there's 2 exams. There's a midterm and a final, and so a couple weeks before the midterm and final, I'm going to be putting all my time into that. My biology has like 5 exams. English has 2 term papers, and math has 4 exams. And you plot all those out, you plot the homeworks, and you look for where's the best time to study for this class. Like if I'm only got so many hours and I got to study, well, I probably want to study when that one's exam is coming up. So it's really not like there's no easy choice. You're like, oh yeah, just, make more time. It really comes down to managing that time in the best ways possible. So we'll talk about that in the future. But yeah, there's no like easy method. It just comes down to
Practice.
Do you have the time to do what you have signed up to do? A lot of people sign up for more than they possibly have time for. So that is the thing. And the other thing is to understand that, yes, in your mind, you go, okay, what is the goal? The goal is to get an A in every class. Sure, but maybe setting realistic and achievable goals are better. Like, okay, if I got a C in physics, I'd be super thrilled because I'd never have to take it again. And honestly, if I got a C in calculus, I'd be totally fine with that. And English, I would like to get a B, and then biology, I'd like to get an A. And that I don't know, lots of students go, oh my God, that's just terrible. No, that's amazing. You passed and you're on to the next semester. Certainly you want to shoot for the stars here, right? But you shoot for the stars, and even if you miss, you land somewhere in the clouds. That's always been my suggestion. Good question. Anything else? We'll check the chat, see if there are any other questions. Doesn't look like it. So that's all I got for you. Look for other announcements about our next seminar next month. It will be, I think I do time management next, and then after that, it'll be test taking strategies. And if you have any questions before then, you can always send me an email. This is my email right here. It's travis.e.draud at occc.edu. I'm always answering emails. My office is right across the hall here in the SEM building. My office is SEM 2B5D. You can come see me and we can talk about things if you don't want to wait till the next seminar. And yeah, thank you guys so much for coming. And I will share this recording with you as well when it's ready.